Hey, hi everyone. Welcome. Just as Megan said, I do as well. Hope you're doing well and your loved ones are doing well on this sunny day. Um, so we would like to start the event by acknowledging the land where the University of Toronto operates. And for anyone who's not in Toronto, perhaps to invite you to reflect from your own location. So the land that Toronto sits upon has a long and tangled history that carries the storied footprints of the Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Anishinaabe nations who have sought to walk gently on this land. They offered assistance to the first European travelers to this territory and shared their knowledge for survival. Toronto has a treaty with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and is part of the Dish with One Spoon agreement to share the land between the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee nations. We acknowledge the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and in moving towards reconciliation, we seek to polish the Silver Covenant chain and a restoration of the relationship between the Onkwe and settler peoples of this land, one that is based in honor and deep respect. Land acknowledgements, of course, continue to be sites of resistance and socio-political contestation. They serve as a starting point, a very small representation of the beginning work towards truth and reconciliation, decolonization. But importantly, they need to be taken beyond like mere recitation. So land acknowledgements require a deeper exploration, self-reflection, particularly of how we are personally connected to the land and what our responsibilities are as a result. So for instance, I personally situate myself on this land as a settler of primarily European ancestry. And so I have come to recognize the many ways that I have benefited from this violent colonial project on this land. This, of course, is a project that has worked for multiple centuries to dispossess Indigenous peoples of their homelands, cultures, and knowledges, to instead impose settler lifestyles and values. And this violence is persisting, ongoing today here and also around the world. Settler colonial ideologies not only continue to impact Indigenous peoples and communities, but also the land itself through continued environmental destruction. So with this in mind, it's essential to continue to support the Indigenous peoples who are at the front lines defending the land, and likewise to work from our own spaces towards the goals of Indigenous sovereignty, land back, through fostering of reciprocal and caring relationships with one another and also with the land. So I invite everyone to consider how you wish to take up responsibilities from within your own land and as beneficiaries of the treaty agreements foundational to Canada. Thank you.
Beautifully said. Thank you very much for starting us off in a good way. All right, so today we are going to hear from Caleb Wesley. He is an Indigenous science educator, a member of the Moose Cree First Nation. He is the coordinator of Indigenous knowledge and science outreach for SciXchange at Toronto Metropolitan University, which was formerly Ryerson University. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Biology and a Bachelor of Education in Science Education. He is also a certified teacher in the province of Ontario. He is currently completing a Master of Applied Science in Environmental Analytical Chemistry. His mandate at SciXchange, which we'll be talking about more today, is to build the capacity and engagement of Indigenous elementary and high school students in STEAM. So Caleb is going to have his discussion, and then afterwards we will have some room to moderate the chat and sort of have people posing questions to the chat where we'll be able to cultivate a list and present them to Caleb to discuss. All right. All right. If you'll take us away, Caleb, it's all yours.
All right. Thank you, folks. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Lois. Thank you, Jocelyn, for all the support on this. I'm just pulling up my slide deck now. Bear with me 1 second. It's nice to see some familiar faces in the chat. And so really appreciative for some folks making time at the lunch hour today. And really nice to see some familiar folks. So today's talk is going to be about making space for traditional Indigenous science in university spaces. And so what we're really going to be covering is we're going to be looking at introductions and origins. I want to tell you a little bit more about myself. We're going to be looking at hide tanning, and then we're going to be looking at snowshoes. And then finally, we'll have that space for questions and discussions. But I just want to check, is everybody able to see my screen okay? Is the screen sharing working? And give me a thumbs up if it's okay. Think we're good? Yeah, okay. So, let's begin with introductions and origins. Here's a giant photo of myself. Like as said at the very beginning, my name is Caleb Wesley. But I want to begin by sharing a little about where I come from. This is my home community here. It's an island community at the southern tip of James Bay. It's called Moose Factory, and it's the homeland of the Moose Cree First Nation. And so I was born here on the res, and my house is like right here. It's on the southeastern end of the island. Um, and so, but I didn't spend all my time there. In grade 6, my family moved down from the north and settled in Toronto, in the northwest end of the city, specifically in the neighborhood of Rexdale. So, like Megan had said at the beginning, I did my BSc in biology, my BEd in science education. I'm currently doing a master's. But what my role is and what I'm going to be sharing about today is my work as the coordinator of Indigenous Knowledge and Science outreach at Toronto Metropolitan University. And so if you're unfamiliar with our campus, we're just down the road from OIZ and from UFT, right at the heart of downtown Toronto. This building here is called Kerr Hall, and my office sits right in the first floor of this building, facing out into this green space, the quad. And so I just wanted to give a little bit of context on where I'm kind of coming from. A little bit more about the work at SciXchange. I pulled this directly from our website. And so what our mission is at SciXchange is to make science engaging, comprehensible, and accessible to the general public. And so that means we're doing work with little kids, grade 1, grade 2, kindergarten, all the way up to the general public. And that's a wide range of both academic background, experience with science, and comprehension ability. So we're working with tons of different folks. But really where my work specifically falls in, my mandate is to increase experiential learning opportunities for students, and primarily Indigenous students. And the way that we do some of this work, we do things like street fairs, we do summer camps, and we also create space for practicing academics to share and communicate their research. And so we're a science outreach office, general public engagement, and also a science communication office. And so really we have a really broad mandate in terms of our work in science. And this work really wouldn't be done without a team of folks behind us. And so our director, Dr. Emily Agard, my colleague Lee Paulseth, and the whole team at SciXchange really make a lot of our work possible. And some of the folks that aren't on these photos include some of our Indigenous staff and all of the volunteers that help support our program. But let me begin by focusing in a little bit about Indigenous science and what that actually looks like in our program. And so we run this program called Stoodis Science. It's our Indigenous STEAM outreach and engagement program. And this is kind of where I live. This is my home. And what Stoodis means, it's actually slang for let's do this, really common in Indigenous communities in this part of Canada. And so Stoodis is kind of like a rallying cry. It's slang, it's from the community, and so it's a little bit fun. And so we the previous coordinator decided to name the program that, and all of this work that I'm going to be sharing with you falls under Stoodis Science. And so that's a really long introduction to the work, but we're going to be focusing in on high tanning first, and then moving on to snowshoeing. So the process of high tanning, it started in 2019, and the former coordinator, her name was Amber Sandy. She took about a year to learn these skills and these practices. And so beginning in 2019, Amber hosted a high tanning camp on TMU's campus. And so this was part of Science Literacy Week, mid-September of 2019. And so what this person is doing here is they're doing a thing called wet scraping. They're removing certain layers of the animal's flesh and fur off of the hide itself. And so they're removing that flesh, they're removing a hypodermis membrane, but they're also removing this thing called the epidermis, which is our skin. That's what most folks are kind of aware of. But they're also removing this thing called the grain layer. And so if you've ever had a really nice leather bag, and it looks kind of bumpy, that's the grain. And so in the process of making buckskin or tanning a hide, in a traditional way, you kind of want to remove that layer. You can keep it on, but traditional buckskin has that layer removed. And all it leaves is these small and mature fibers. And what these fibers are made up of, they're made up of collagen, they're made up of elastin, I think fibrin is another one. And they're essentially just a network of tangled fibers, kind of like a ball of yarn, but worse. And they're all interconnected. And so that small fiber. And so after wet scraping, what ends up happening is this process called wringing. And so I'm going to share with you this video of folks wringing out a hide. And so this hide is full of moisture, full of water. It's been soaked in water. You want to get out all that water. And so they're holding this hide wrapped around these dowels and twisting it, like wringing out the water.
Work it though.
Gotta get the motion going.
And then you'll see her, I think her name is Wesley.
Sometimes,
she
yeah,
moves the hide around to get a different spot. You see she's focusing in on this whiter side.
How do you get it to stay like?
And then they're going to twist again, and they're going to wring out
You're much
more of
stronger
that
than me.
liquid.
It is like,
No, I'm using this as a lever.
oh,
I was
like, oh,
And so what this process is doing is it's causing mechanical stress on that protein matrix of those inner protein fibers that we've left, the collagen and elastin. And the reason why we want to wring out all of the moisture and kind of stretch them out a little bit is because we want to do this thing called braining. And what this does is it puts animal brains within this protein network. We call it a protein matrix specifically. And so the brains of an animal contain this really interesting property where it's just enough of fat in order to tan a hide through this process called brain tanning. And so what we do is we're inserting the brains of the animal within this protein matrix inside the flesh itself. That's what this person was doing here. They're putting the brains inside of that specific layer of tissue. And afterwards, what ends up happening is you put it out on this rack, you stretch it out, so you're further stretching out those protein fibers from one another. You're further breaking apart the protein matrix. And what these folks are doing now is they're softening the hide. They're using dowels to press into the hide itself, and that act of pressing into it is further mechanical force that's being acted on those protein fibers. And then part of brain tanning is you need this additional step of smoking. And so what these folks are doing now is they're creating a smoke sack. It's just a canvas bag that's sewn up that eventually gets attached to the hide. And so these are the canvas bags on the end of the table and the hide itself being wrapped up kind of like a pizza pocket or a calzone. It gets wrapped up into a little sandwich. And then what ends up happening is the hide gets smoked. And so you see that there's the top, smoke sack, and then inside the bucket there's fire. And that fire is smoke.
Yeah, okay. And then I was like, oh, that by the way. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, my memory's horrible too. Okay, now you have to have a carrot.
And so what's actually happening here is the brains that we've inserted into this protein matrix plus the smoke. It's really a chemical reaction. The fatty acids from the brain itself plus the aldehydes that are in the smoke, when they come together, they undergo this process called rancidification. It's a organic chemistry reaction, and so hide tanning is really a combination of mechanical force being acted onto the hide itself, that softening of it, the ringing, the stretching over a frame, plus the chemical reaction and the chemical modification of those fats that we've inserted into the hide. And so this rancidification, it falls into a class of reactions called oxidation, and it changes the structures of those fats. And what it creates is creates these fatty aldehydes within the protein matrix. And it's just like melting butter on the inside. It gets so soft and supple, and it makes buckskin buckskin. It's kind of like this really soft blanket. And it's the combination of all that mechanical force plus the chemical reaction of fat and aldehyde and the temperature of that fire that causes this process. So really, it's a chemical reaction that Indigenous peoples have been working with for thousands of years. And here's a photo of the inaugural coordinator, Amber Sandy, with a couple of the facilitators, Melissa Roberts and Julia Pinseller. And really, this work was started because of her back in 2019. And that's kind of where I kind of took it up. It was when I took over the role of the coordinator. It was part of my mandate to pick that up. But before we get to that, I want to talk about 2020. And so 2020 comes around and we all kind of know what happened then. Lockdown. And so Amber wanted to host another hide tanning camp, but she had to modify it. And so towards the later end, fall 2020, she decided to go up to Sioux Lookout with a small group of folks and document a hide tanning camp. And so what these folks are doing now is they're softening a hide after the smoking process. And so they're using pumice stones and sandpaper in order to remove some more layers, but also just make the hide a little bit softer. Here's another photo of the frames of the hides being framed. And then here's just a group photo of them from their time in Sioux Lookout in 2020. And the reason why I wanted to share this story is because part of the work that Amber was doing was documenting the hide tanning camp. And so on our website, we have the Stoodis Science virtual hide camp, and it documents the whole process of hide tanning. It's about an hour long to watch all these videos. And so it covers things like wet scraping a deer hide. It covers things like neutralizing a hide, so a little bit of the chemistry aspect. Fleshing and removing a hair on a moose hide, and so braining a hide. And so all of this information is housed within our website, and it's accessible to you all. And so that brings us to 2022. That's kind of when I took over the role as coordinator of Indigenous Knowledge and Science Outreach. So we begin in the summer. My first day was July 11th of 2022. And we had the idea of doing another hide tanning camp in 2022. It would have been during the third week of September, September 19th to 23rd. And so that was kind of what my initial mandate was for the first few months of my time at SciXchange. It was to put together a hide tanning camp like we did in 2019, like we did in 2020. And so I was given a budget. I was given around $30,000 to do this work. And it would include things like honoraria for our facilitators, flights per diem, our accommodations, materials, et cetera, et cetera. And so that was kind of like one of our first projects. And so I started the process. I ended up getting a fire permit and applying for that. You can see the date here is August 22nd, 2022. I also started going through all of our materials. And so there are those dowels that folks were using to wring out. There were those buckets that had the fire, our wet scrapers. We had some tents and frames. We had a bunch of random stuff. But the problem was I didn't know how to tan a hide. And so I was really relying on external partners, the artists that we had worked with in the past, to bring the content to the university. And I also didn't have as much community connections, both at TMU and across the school boards in the GTA. And so I was just like, okay, I don't know if I'll have participants for this hide tanning camp. Um, I want it to be for Indigenous youth, but also I'm also relying on these external partners in not a good way to deliver this content. And so it didn't feel right. And it was a lot of money too. And so in 2022, I decided to cancel our hide tanning camp. That was a really hard decision, and I kind of felt a bit like a failure because I was brought in to do this work and I wasn't able to do it. But I didn't forget about hide tanning. And so that kind of brings me to 2023, 2024. I went on this whole journey of learning how to tan hides. And so I enrolled in this bark tanning course, which is a completely different form of hide tanning, with this guy named Matt Richards. And so here's me scraping a small bit of our hide. What I'm doing now is I'm removing the hair from it. I'm coating it with this solution of calcium hydroxide, otherwise known as hydrated lime. You may have seen it in garden centers or like put on grass. It's kind of a fertilizer. And so I started experimenting and documenting this process for me. I have a couple more videos I want to show you of the actual process. And what I'm doing here is I've soaked the hide for about a week in this calcium hydroxide solution. And what it does, I can remove the hair from the hide, and all I'm doing now is just wringing it out, but you'll notice there's little bits of hair starting to come off. There's some hair there, and then I was really just documenting this whole process. I'm a scientist by training, and so I just wanted to document everything. Here's a hide I'm looking now, the actual bark. So this is the bark team. And it's just so we get to see how that hide, which was white at the very beginning, those top few photos, is now absorbing all of that color. And then after some more time, I'm beginning to process the hide. And I want to share a little story about the tool I'm using. The tool I'm using is actually, it's a part of a femur from my great-grandmother. So I went back up north to go help my grandparents do something, and my grandmother, she gifted me this hide tanning tool that her mother used to tan beaver skins. And so that's what I'm using right here. I'm using that femur from that animal to scrape the hypodermis layer off of the hide. I'm gonna speed it up so you can kind of see the whole process. I'm just removing layers, removing a lot of moisture. Pause that one. There we go. And now I'm working on the other side of it. And that's kind of the finished hide. There's a couple more steps, but I don't want to delve too deeply into that. And so that was bark tanning, but it was a small section. It was about a 1 foot by 1 foot. So I ended up pursuing another hide tanning mentor out in Victoria. So I traveled out to Vancouver Island to learn how to tan buckskin, but a whole buckskin. And here is my hide that I'm working on a beam. So I'm wet scraping the hair off and the epidermis layers off and the grain layer off of this hide. And then I also learned how to tan sheepskin. And so I spent about a week just tanning hides out in Victoria with this one of my mentors named Mara Cure. And that was a really interesting experience. I kind of just wanted to be present, and I didn't want to document as heavily as I did with the bark tanning. And so these are the only 2 photos from that time that I have. But I do have some photos of the finished hide. That's my finished buckskin that now lives in our office. And it kind of brings us back to the story of making space for traditional Indigenous science on campus. Told you the process of high tanning and the story of how I came to it, but let's talk about making space. And so what we ended up doing with all of this work is we created this high tanning gallery on TMU's campus. And we displayed some of the tools that I made. Here's a frame that I worked on. I'm also still learning, and so I can tell you right now there are mistakes with this frame that I need to go back and fix. It's missing some little triangles in the corner to add some structure. It's also a foot too wide, and so I'm still learning this process and refining this craft. But we wanted to share it with folks anyways. And so here's some of the other hides that I worked on. Those are the bark tan buckskin that I worked with. So this one at the top is tanned using oak bark, and then this one is tanned with mimosa tannin extracts. And so there's slightly different colors and they're different densities too. And then finally, we have our buckskin that was mounted on the wall. And folks were able to come up and smell the smokiness of it and feel the softness of the hide. And I want to share with you this video of our work in the hide tanning gallery that kind of documents us putting it together and what the purpose was. So let's watch this video.
Welcome to another day in the life working at SciXchange. This is a little throwback to when we were setting up for the hide tanning gallery. The gallery highlighted community contributions to the art and science of hide tanning. The gallery included photos from the 2019 hide tanning camp held here on campus, several different tools that are used to complete the process, as well as a variety of finished hides. This gallery was the inaugural show of the Pod Student Gallery Space, which is a brand new space here on campus to highlight and share student work with community members. This gallery was curated as part of Science Literacy Week and Indigenous Education Week here at TMU by the Indigenous Knowledge and Science Outreach Coordinator at SciXchange, Caleb Wesley.
And so the person that you hear speaking there was one of the student staff that work at SciXchange, and it really just encapsulates how work like this is such a team effort and it wouldn't be possible without them. Yeah, and so we hosted this hide tanning gallery in October of 2023, which was kind of the announcement of our new hide tanning initiatives. And so that leaves the question, where does that leave our hide tanning programs now? I did all this work in learning, and we hosted this gallery space in September, October 2023. And I'm excited to say that in May of this year, we'll be relaunching our urban hide tanning camp on TMU's campus. And so we'll be doing this for just the general public, but also community space for TMU Indigenous faculty, staff, students, community members. And so that's really what we're looking for to do in May. But also, we're currently organizing to do hide tanning camps with urban Indigenous youth in Toronto. And so I hope to do these either in June or July. And really part of this work of relaunching our urban hide camps is because our long-term goal is to make urban and community-based hide tanning more sustainable and ongoing, helping our communities to pick up these ancestral skills. That's really what kind of the dream is for our hide tanning program. And I'm excited to say that we'll be working on about 4 hides this spring and summer with our community. And so that's hide tanning, but this is kind of a double feature. And so I want to also talk to you about snowshoes. So we're talking about making space for traditional Indigenous science, and I wanted to give you 2 examples, hide tanning and snowshoes. And so my journey to coming to snowshoes was a little bit different than hide tanning. With hide tanning, it was something that I kind of picked up from previous work. But with snowshoes, it was kind of on my own fruition. And so I was reflecting on the traditional practices from my community, and I said, okay, what do I kind of want to pick up? And I kind of brainstormed all these ideas. But one of the things that really stuck out to me was growing up as a kid on the res, especially far north, about 900 kilometers north of Toronto, we get a lot of snow and deep snow. So snowshoes was something I always grew up with. So here's just some photos of some think they're Cree style snowshoes, but Cree from like northern Quebec. And so I always had these images in like my upbringing. And so this was kind of what I was thinking about. And then this pair of snowshoes is actually my great grandfather's pair of snowshoes. And so you can kind of see very similar style and modifications with the pom-poms at the top, but also like the ingenuity of using like string and shoelaces as lashings for the snowshoes. And so it was just, I kind of grew up with those and I wanted to pick up that work from kind of my ancestors. And so some of the folks that kind of inspired me for that, and I want to share the photo with them. This is my great grandmother, Hattie Visitor, born Gilpin, and John D. Visitor. So these are my great grandparents. And I had the privilege to live in the same home as John D. when I was a kid, living on the res. And so I learned a lot of my Cree from living with John D. And those are his pairs of snowshoes that kind of inspired this work for me. And what I have here now is I have this video of me learning the process of lacing. And so I sourced some snowshoes, just the frames and some lacing, and I started to experiment and try it out. And I also documented this process. And so the video is a little choppier because it was such a massive file. I had to cut it down. But here's me trying to figure out how to lace these things. And so I was doing research online, trying to see what worked, what didn't work. A lot of trial and error. And you can see that I'm like twisting the cord around a bunch of times and it's getting all tangled. And so it was a really frustrating experience. It took me 8 hours to make one pair. But eventually I ended up coming away with a full set of finished snowshoes. And here you can kind of see me working through the actual latticing of the snowshoes, creating those different layers. And then, yeah, I think this is almost done. Yeah. And so it really was kind of like reconnecting with some of those ancestral skills for me on a more personal level. But I knew that I couldn't do that with kids or like just the general public because it took me 8 hours sitting at my dining table, frustratingly lacing and unlacing these snowshoes. And so I said, okay, I can't do that in a span of like an hour and a half workshop. That won't work. So how can I make this more accessible? How can I make this more fun and engaging for folks? And so what I ended up doing is I created these mini snowshoes. And so I got these dowels, wooden dowels, and I boiled them. And then I bent them in shape, the same way that we would bend them traditionally, where we boil the wood, lash them at the top and the bottom, and insert these crossbars. And so I was experimenting with that. And then I said, okay, well, what if we make them a little bit more realistic? And so I created this, what we call like the master cord and these framing cords. I can't remember the title of these. There's a specific title for these. But I said, okay, there's a way that we can make this a little bit more fun and engaging. And so I'm going to share with you this photo or this video. So turn the volume off. And what I'm doing is I'm actually attaching burlap to the back of the snowshoes, just using a hot glue gun. And then I'm cutting away the excess. And so making sure it's secured, cut away the excess of that burlap. And so that the finished product of our snowshoes looks kind of like a real pair. And so we have the lacing at the top, the space for the toe, that central spacing, and the spacing at the bottom. And so we were creating them in a mini way. So these are mini snowshoes. And what we ended up doing is we ended up delivering this workshop in partnership with the Ontario Science Centre. And so I'm going to share with you another video of that work now.
Today, we hosted our Science of Snowshoeing workshop at the Ontario Science Centre. This workshop was a part of Stoodis Science, which is our Indigenous STEAM outreach and engagement initiative. Today, we explored the science and Indigenous roots of snowshoeing with our Indigenous Knowledge and Science Outreach Coordinator, Caleb Wesley. When we got there, they had this lovely sign pointing to our room, and once we found it, it was time to start setting up. We set up our PowerPoint, started unpacking our material, and then also put up some signs. Then we brought out our displays that were going to be shown to the participants. Participants got to make their own miniature snowshoe, so we had all of the decorative material, and then it was time to get started. During the workshop, Caleb explained the science behind how snowshoes work and how to use them. After the lesson, we walked participants step by step on how to make their very own miniature snowshoe. It was so fun seeing how everybody was getting creative. They all looked so amazing. Before ending the day, participants were able to test out the real snowshoes. Thank you to the Ontario Science Centre for inviting us to complete this workshop. Thank you for all of those who participated. We hope you had fun and learned something new.
And so we hosted this workshop, and here's an aerial shot of it. And we had about 75 participants on that day. And this was in December 16th of 2023. And so we ran 2 workshops back to back. And it was a really awesome time. Super, super fun. And I didn't even expect that they would ask me to put them on. I didn't have the lashings for it. And so I just improvised with string that I had on hand. And I made it work. And it was a really awesome time. But it kind of raises that question again of like, what does that leave for our snowshoe making program? Because that was a fun activity, but really we're talking about making space for traditional Indigenous science at universities, but also just other spaces. And so like our mini snowshoe making was a really awesome hit, and it's going to be part of our core programming moving forward. And so it's staying with us, and it has its happy little home, and it can be something that we deliver to Indigenous youth out in the community. But also, we're looking to expand in delivering full-size snowshoe making workshops for winter 2024. And so maybe next year we'll be able to work on creating whole pairs and do that as an ongoing workshop for Indigenous community members to kind of pick up that skill so that they can learn the process of making a full pair of snowshoes, not just the mini snowshoes. And so that's kind of the dream for this work. I've been talking for a while and shared these stories of mine, and so I just want to say miigwech for listening. And I'm going to throw it back over to Megan for our moderated conversation section. And so I'm going to stop screen sharing, and then we'll have some discussion. Miigwech.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that was amazing. It brought me back to the first time I worked with some hide and I was able to make a drum, and it was just a really fulfilling experience. And so thank you for talking about that with all of us. It's an amazing, amazing thing. So now we're gonna go into our question period. So we are thinking about opening up the option. If you would like, you can say instead of typing your question for Caleb, you have that option as well.
I might just ask, because I'm guessing folks are sort of getting their thoughts together. Caleb, you mentioned a website where those videos could be watched.
Yeah. So there are 2 spots. Like I shared a couple of different videos. And so Team Use SciXchange is where the high tanning gallery videos are. And I'm going to send that for folks into the chat. And so at the very end, I'll screen share it again after questions, but to everyone. So I just sent a link into the chat to our Stoodis Science hide tanning camp, and that video of all the high tanning videos, it's right there. And for our TMU's social SciXchange social media, I'll send that link as well too, because then you'll be able to see like our Instagram posts and our TikTok posts that relate to some of those videos that I shared with you. So I'm going to pop that into the chat as well. And
Awesome.
so some of our videos are there. The other videos of me like doing the process and kind of working through it, those are my own videos and they live on my Google Drive and they're not anywhere. They're kind of just part of my own documentation practice for these skills.
Wonderful.
May I ask a question?
Cool.
ahead.
Oh,
So
Yeah,
I
go
see
ahead.
both Murphy and Anne want to ask questions. So
And go first.
okay,
thanks,
so
Kirby. I don't know who was
yeah.
first, but Miigwech, Caleb, I just really enjoyed your presentation, and I
Mhm.
especially I think you're such a creative problem solver, and I love how you approach things with your scientific mind and you documented everything. And I guess maybe my question is more about logistics, but I thought
Right.
that gallery space was such a good idea.
Right.
How did that come about? I mean, it's you. I think you said it was a new gallery, and then how did you get to exhibit there?
Okay. So it was partly just our connections within the institution. And so the coordinator for that space and the space on campus, he reached out to the Faculty of Science and said, we have this new gallery space. Who are some of the folks that are interested? And so my director, she said, okay, well, we could possibly do this. This is something that came up. Are there any thoughts and ideas on how we can approach this? And so as a team, we kind of brainstormed and came up with some different possibilities around some of the work that we did. And the high tanning gallery was the one that kind of really spoke to us. And we sent that pitch to the facilitator for that space, and he loved it. And it just so happened that it aligned with our institution's Indigenous Education Week and NSERC's Science Literacy Week. And so we kind of fit perfectly into both Indigenous and Science Education Weeks at our institution. And we had that partnership with the coordinator for that space. And so logistically, it was really about keeping our ear to the ground for opportunities of amplifying Indigenous STEM or amplifying our work and then acting on it. And those two overlapping weeks, it just worked out really well in our favor. I think if we were to do this at a different time of the year, say like December or say like February or even now, it would work. But it was by being in relationship with folks at our institution and in our community that we were able to deliver that. And when we communicated this to folks, we invited everyone. So we sent it out to Indigenous students, staff, faculty through the Indigenous community networks. We sent it through our Faculty of Science networks. And so we sent it through some provost's office that were focused around EDI. And so we got all sorts of folks in attendance. We got our Dean of the Faculty of Science. We got graduate students, undergraduate students, professors and faculty, Indigenous staff and community members. And so it was a really wide spectrum of folks that we were reaching. And so being embedded in community and then like using those community connections to do this type of work. That's what I would say to kind of answer those logistical questions.
I love that. Thank you. So
Yeah.
you tracked, so just to follow up, you tracked who came? Is that how you knew that the dean came and different graduate students?
So
Okay.
we had a registration at the very beginning. And so we registered, but we also gave away free lunch. And so we had sandwiches and we had like a tomato salad and drinks, coffee and tea. And so we hosted this over the lunch hour, and that's how we kind of brought folks in. We said, okay, free food, and made them aware of it. And so there was a couple of factors which really maximized our reach and impact.
Okay, I love it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And then Murphy, you had a question as well, comment.
Free food always brings them in.
Absolutely, free food.
So, Tansei Akosani, this is the first time I've ever had a chance to hear you. People have raved about the work you've been doing, both, at TMU and before, because I think we know people in common. Ryan Nathan
Yeah, I'm aware.
Yeah, Ryan's always raving about your work, and you actually made a video. Well, I used to be a principal at Queen A, and you made it when Ryan was a teacher there.
Yeah,
You made a video for our Indigenous language and culture students.
I do remember that. Yeah, I remember
Yeah,
that video.
yeah, during when we were doing that on and off virtual, and really great to see the work you're doing, and I like how you're bringing Indigenous science into different spaces
Yeah.
and into higher education, and also helping people who are maybe coming from a non-Indigenous science background, showing them where the chemistry is, where all of those things are, to help them
Yeah.
see and understand that. So really kudos to the work that you're doing around that.
Yeah.
In terms of Toronto, you've actually got entire Toronto Central Science team on here, because two of my staff. So I'm now central principal for whose portfolio includes science STEM.
Okay.
And my science coordinator and my central teacher, I can see their names are on here.
Well, hello.
Yeah, Marcia and Stephen. I assume that you probably do some work with the TDSB's Urban Indigenous Education Center, and so that's really great. And
Yep.
if you ever see a place for doing, we'd love to connect with you and maybe talk about also where that work might overlap in terms of the work that we're doing, because we're doing a lot of work around getting our teachers to think without necessarily Eurocentric, Christian-focused approach to curriculum. So it's really great to see the work you're doing, because it helps have some models that we can point teachers to in terms of the great things that are happening in different spaces. So thank you.
Miigwech Murphy.
More of a comment than a question, I know.
What I am going to do at that point.
Oops, I think did we lose Caleb?
Oh, Caleb, you're on mute.
You're muted.
We lost you for a second.
No worries, I'm back. I saw that for a second and I was like, oh, okay, that was weird when I started screen sharing. You should all be able to see my screen with my contact information, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And so if you just want to take a screenshot or note that down, my email is there, my office phone number, my cell phone. So if I get texts in the middle of the night asking about hide tanning, I'll know where it came from. And so, yeah, there's my contact information and a little bit of context about who I am, where I'm coming from. So feel free to contact me after this to kind of continue some of those connections and conversations. We are located in Toronto, and so that's kind of where our home is and where we love to do the work, because there's not too many people doing this, and there's definitely a need for it, especially in the largest city in the country and the largest school board, right? Like, we should be leaders in this work because we have so many Indigenous students within our spheres of education. We really should be doing better. And so, yeah, that's part of my work to kind of do that work. Are there other questions, comments, reflections, etc.?
We have a couple questions in the chat.
Yeah.
So Lindsay Pylon asked, what applications do you see for Indigenous science and climate resilience, sorry.
Climate resilience. This one's always interesting because the community where I come from is not the worst impacted by climate change, but it is definitely impacted by climate change. And so, for example, one of the things that I grew up with in the community was flooding. We're on a river delta, and so if there was a lot of water, our island would get flooded. And so I saw massive icebergs come onto the island and bigger than houses. And there were points in my childhood where we had to like sign up for registry to get flyouts. And so there are things like that that we kind of grew up and experienced. And then this past summer, there was a lot of forest fires in our territory. And so I saw videos of the adjacent community like almost burned down. It was on the other side of the river. So there's a lot of impact on climate change for Indigenous communities. And I think that goes across the globe. And so what are the implications for climate resistance, like this work on climate resistance? Specifically, I don't think this work there are too many implications, but there are other spaces that Indigenous science is doing that work. So for example, there's a lot of Indigenous scientists who are working in the environmental tech section, who work in First Nations at more of the government level. And so there's a lot of environmental technicians that are doing field work, studying like levels of pollution in their community, whether that be anthropogenic or climate change induced. There are folks that are studying and tracking wildfire risk in terms of temperature, in terms of humidity, things like that. And then there are folks that are like tracking things like water and levels of water and things like that. And then there are communities that are making plans in response to those things. And so it's not uncommon for communities to move in response to climate change. I know that in northern Quebec, where some of my ancestors come from and where my grandmother's from, they had to move communities because of the construction of a hydroelectric dam. And so it's not impossible for our communities to respond to climate change. It's been done before. And so I think that there's a lot of folks that are doing on the ground work, especially in environmental management, that are making those plans to respond to climate change. This work, it's not a good example of that, but I think there are far better examples of that. Does that kind of answer that question about climate resilience and how Indigenous science can work to make Indigenous communities more climate change resistant?
Yep.
I hope so.
So, Serena, would you like to go ahead?
I'm gonna
Sure,
also
thanks,
stop share.
Megan. Hi, Caleb. Sorry I came in late. I work at Fleming College in Peterborough, and I was out in the Learning Lodge with some students. We were having a fire, and so I just wanted to hop in. And I actually worked at TMU right before you. So I was there at the powwow and saw when Amber was doing the hide tanning workshops, and she did some awesome work.
Yeah.
So Indigenous knowledge, like it's not recognized as scientific or academic at all. So
Right.
it's really important work that you're doing. And I just want to say thank you for that.
Thank you.
I have a faculty who's taking up this kind of work as well at our Frost campus in Lindsay. So
Right.
he's teaching STEM to college students, and he's bringing
Right.
in Indigenous sciences, but he's kind of newer to it. And I'm wondering if I could put him in touch with you to maybe share resources or connect in some way.
Okay. Yeah, we can do that. Yeah, I think that would be interesting. I'm always looking to see what other folks are doing at other institutions. Yeah, and I haven't seen too much work in the GTA. I noticed that it's outside of the GTA, like Fleming, Trent, Guelph, Queens. They're kind of more been leaders in Indigenous STEM space, at least in Ontario.
Yeah.
There are pockets of it here in Toronto, but not too much. Yeah, for sure. Did you get my contact
Awesome.
information previously?
I did. Yeah. And
Okay,
his name is
perfect.
Ryan Metcalf. He's from Georgina Island.
Okay.
So I'll just pass along your info and have him reach out.
Perfect. Thank you.
And I don't know if you've been or heard of it, but there's the Turtle Island Indigenous Science Conference happening in.
A 21st to the 23rd in Regina.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
you're aware. Okay, good.
I
Yeah.
am absolutely aware.
Okay.
And I will be going to that conference. I actually just got back from another conference. It was the ACES in Canada conference that happens in Vancouver. So there's two really big Indigenous STEM conferences that happen in Canada, at least. There's ACES, and then there's the Turtle Island Indigenous Science Conference. Those are the two big ones.
Okay, I hadn't heard of that one. Miigwech.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay.
We have
Go ahead, Megan, sorry.
We have another question. Mike Weaver says, thanks for sharing everything and the amazing documentation and work by everyone. Could you talk or describe more about the tool used in the beginning for removing the dermis layers?
Okay, I'll get it. 1 second. I'm gonna go get my toolkit. I am currently in the process of tanning some more hides. I have a couple of bark tan going, some fish skins, and a sheep skin. So I have all my kit at home. So the tool that I was using is this tool right here. I don't even know what animal it's from. I think it's probably from a caribou. Most likely a femur of some kind, or like a leg bone. And then what it is it has a beveled kind of edge on it, and that's the actual scraping edge. But also the marrow of the tool itself has been hollowed out. And so it's a really useful tool for removing layers of the hypodermis. It's really good for layers of the hypodermis. But in more modern contexts, we have other types of tools, and those tools are actually like made out of metal. And so we have like our wet scrapers, which is essentially just an edge of stainless steel rod with some vinyl tape on it. And you just use it to scrape off those layers of the hide when it's wet scraping. And then we have these like really big, more sharp edge tools. These ones are dry scrapers, which are used for kind of shaving the hide itself. And so the position that this small tool from my great grandmother falls into, it falls more into a wet scraper. And it's more of a handheld tool, a single hand tool, while these larger ones that people more commonly see and saw in those photos are two-handed tools. They're used for larger pieces of work, less refined. And so, yeah, that's just a little bit more about the tools that we use in hide tanning. I hope that answers that question.
That's really cool. I love seeing that your instruments that you use.
Yeah, it's just in the bin.
Yeah. So Rosalinda Ferlin asked, how are your animal skins sourced?
Right. So there are a couple of ways that you can source hides. Now, one is with conservation authorities. I heard this recommendation from a colleague of mine, is conservation authorities that are involved. If there are hunters that go out and they like kill a hide or something like that, conservation authorities will kind of may be aware of some of those. And so some conservation authorities will have them. So reach out to conservation authorities. They might have some. Another way to kind of source them is just from community members. And so as I've done more of this hide tanning work, more and more community members have said, oh, I have a contact for this. I have a contact for that. And so a couple of the hides that I've actually sourced were just people that are hunters. And then the way that hides were sourced in the past was done through our facilitators. And so some of the facilitators that Amber brought in, they sourced the hides from their community networks. And so really it is community networks that allow you to source them. Like you can't purchase a salted deer hide easily. You can't import them from the US. They have a lot in the US. You can import them from overseas, from places like China, but that's not the best quality, and it's also not from this territory, and it's just not a good way of going about it. And so being in community and letting people know that you're taking up this practice will begin to open some of those doors. But it's
Cool.
not as easy. Mhm.
Cool. So Murby has another question. We are starting to see more Indigenous voices in science, particularly in environmental science and biology. Yay.
Yep.
We are looking for more examples of Indigenous perspectives in STEM. What is exciting you in Indigenous STEM right now?
So, the conferences that I've been attending in terms of Indigenous STEM, there are one of the things that's exciting me the most is the amount of folks that are doing this work. It could feel like, and I know it from my perspective, and I feel like I'm doing this work, especially as an undergrad. I was like the only Indigenous kid in my science classes, and so it was like, you're doing it alone. It felt very lonely. And even within the Indigenous community at York, there was nobody else doing science. And so I couldn't connect with as much folks around the courses I was taking. Like, I couldn't, folks that were in our Indigenous community on campus couldn't relate to me about an Orgo midterm. And so it was just different contexts. And so it was very isolating. But one of the things that I'm most excited about now is that there are so much more people doing this work. It feels like that there's a person popping up in faculties of science, colleges that are doing Indigenous STEM or land-based work. There's more connection between Indigenous students at the undergraduate and graduate level that are doing STEM. And so there's a lot more opportunities for mentorship. And then on the more national level, Indigenous STEM professionals, whether they be professors, people from industry, or like students, are becoming more and more present. And so one of the things I really loved about attending some of these Indigenous science conferences was seeing the utmost brilliance of Indigenous STEM folks and seeing that Indigenous science, like brilliance and excellence on display, was awesome. And so you see people in ribbon skirts and ribbon shirts, beaded earrings, talking about quantum mechanics and their research in chemistry or in soil, or studying biology of fish and marine mammals. It's like, cool, like you're an Indigenous science baddie. And so I really enjoy seeing that brilliance begin to emerge. And so that's what gives me the most excitement right now. It's not a specific discipline, it's our community beginning to take our position as leaders in STEM, I should say. Mhm.
Wonderful. The next one is from Lynn. She says it's beyond commendable to see Indigenous science become much better viable in the public sphere. Gentle and respectful invitation for comment, honoring the spirit of the animals and plants, thanks to whom which humans can have clothing, shelter, and transportation.
Mhm. Yeah, one of the things that I think about in terms of honoring those animals is like, I'm really intentional with our high tanning practice. And so any of the animals that we work with, we have to tell kind of where they have come from. And so where they were killed, when they were killed, and what was kind of the purpose. And so the hides that we displayed were from Montana. And those ones were killed in 2023. Yeah, fall 2023. Like September-ish. And so we talk about that, but also when one of the things that you may not have noticed with the hide is that it has scars along its spine. And those scars along its spine tell us the story of its life. And you can see, based on what emerges of tanning a hide, you can see the story of this animal. And those scars along its spine, and especially in its back area, tell us that this animal was living in a region where there was a lot of fences. Because those scars are actually barbed wire scars. And so it tells you that where this animal was kind of living, it was trapped and enclosed in certain areas, and it was migrating through those spaces. And it just shows you that something that you see is natural in nature is still impacted by humans, and telling that story of and interpreting the hide itself and saying, okay, this is kind of the life of that animal, and this is some of the evidence for that, is a way that we kind of honor that story and kind of share that story. And so I was really intentional in doing that at our hide tanning gallery with folks.
Wonderful. I think those are all the questions that we have today. There's no, oh, yeah, if there's no one else, going once, going twice. Sold. Okay, so thank you so much. Jocelyn has said we have another guest, exciting guest speaker on Wednesday, March 20th from 12 to 1. So please register for that. She put in the link in the chat. And yeah, thank you so much again to Caleb for taking the time in this busy schedule to talk about this with us today. And I wish you guys the best day in the sun. Get some vitamin D while you can. Good spring is coming, so no worries. Anyway, thank you so much, everybody, for attending today.
Miigwech, Bumapee. Thank you.